You're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The horizon is empty in every direction. Your only companion is a 7-meter rowboat. You've been out here for months, alone, and the nearest human being is thousands of kilometres away. Then one night, a rogue wave slams into you and your world flips upside down. That was just one moment in the 5-year human-powered circumnavigation of today's guest, Erden Eruc. Welcome back to Why Do You Think You Could Do That? The show where we explore the lives of ordinary people who've done batshit crazy things and said yes to the impossible. My guest today is someone whose journey is almost too big to wrap your head around. He's the first person in history to complete a solo, human-powered circumnavigation of the planet. He's rowed across 3 oceans, climbed mountains on multiple continents, and spent more time alone at sea than anyone on Earth. But here's the thing. He started out like so many of us, a regular career, a set of dreams that could have stayed on the shelf. Today, we'll find out how those dreams turned into one of the greatest endurance feats of our time and how he's now gearing up for the 2026 Golden Globe race. Erden, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm really looking forward to this because the more I dive into your story, the more I'm blown away. You've done so many epic things, but I don't want to start with the epic. I want to understand who is Erden as a young boy. Now, what was life growing up like in Turkey?
I was born in Cyprus, raised in Turkey. My father was in the army and I was an army brat. We moved all over the place. And then he was part of the mountaineering school in Erden when I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So 4 years. And I learned how to ski, how to swim. I watched people rappelling. So I was part of the mix during all their training. So the physical life came naturally to me. And my father eventually took me up a volcano in south central Turkey called Erciyes, which is about 3,900 meters tall. And that was my first taste of mountaineering. And then after that, I thought of myself as a mountaineer. And it just kept building like that, one step after another.
So as a kid, did you have a dream of what you would become?
Well, early on, I wanted to be a pilot. Then I wanted to be an officer like my father. And then when I was in boarding school, just coming into middle school, our instructors brought a black and white television and made us watch the astronauts walking on the moon live. That was Apollo 17. So I went to bed that night thinking I can be an astronaut. And then I woke up in the morning and I said, well, all astronauts are Americans. I'm not, so I can't be. And that was over. So that's a lesson right there. I can dial right back to that and say, hey, had you decided, you might have been.
It's interesting. You've got the same dreams as many a young boy across the planet. You trained as an engineer. What was normal day life for you before any of this real adventure stuff happened?
Well, I hold a mechanical engineering degree, and then I received a master's degree in that. I pursued PhD in engineering mechanics. I completed the general exams in that, got another master's degree. Then the PhD dissertation work was going just too long, and you need 3 legs to that to stand that stool. I need an advisor, a topic, and funding. So at all times, one of that was missing, so I couldn't finish it. I left and then got into IT world and rode that wave for a while, received an MBA in 1999. And throughout all that time, I was very physical. I ran marathons. I started judo. I was a wrestler in the university. I climbed big walls in Yosemite, El Capitan, and Half Dome. And I had Denali on my sights. I tried it once, pulled back, engineer, stuck in an office, daydreaming, gazing out the window all the time and waiting for the weekend to come so I could go do things.
It's funny, Eden. I'm actually a civil engineer by trade, and one of my greatest joys was leaving that profession. Back then, when you're an engineer and you're working in IT, did you ever once think that one day you would row across oceans?
No. However, um, when I was in Silver Spring, Maryland, just on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., working in an IT uh, software development lab, there was a world map hanging on the wall that had the Americas on the right, Pacific in the middle, and the old world on the left. And I stood in front of that thing one day and traced my finger across from DC to Turkey over the Bering Straits. And I asked myself, what if? Then that became a bit of an obsession. And when I shared that with others, I was getting questions like, have you done anything like that before? So cynicism was all around me. I learned quickly that not everybody needed to know. Eventually, when I was rock climbing with a friend, he fell and he died. I decided that I wanted to do the circumnavigation properly. And so ocean rowing got into the mix. And that's how I decided I needed to spend time on the oceans. And that became a major part of the whole experience eventually.
Every great story, there's always a moment where something shifts and there's a spark that changes the direction of your life. And as you just alluded to, was the death of your friend, Goran Krop. Take me back to that moment when Goran passed.
We were rock climbing in eastern Washington on basalt columns, an area called Frenchman Coulee. And we were top roping after leading every pitch. One would climb and then the other would go clean it, come back. So we had these lines right next to each other. And on one of those, the last one, he was above me and I heard the clatter and I looked up, saw him falling. I crouched down. I took out as much line as I could, but the whole protection system failed. It was a catastrophic failure of his protection. And he hit the shelf I was on and then fell down onto the path below. There was nothing to be done when I went back next to him. And evacuation was done by helicopter, and we were lifted up and taken to a nearby hospital. I was taken to the emergency room. The line had wrapped around my arm. I had a strangulation injury of my left arm, and he was taken to the morgue. It was a traumatic event. And that became a turning point for me because when I was thinking of such big journeys that eventually evolved into the circumnavigation that I accomplished, I was reading books about similar journeys and people who have done similar things. One of the books I read was Ultimate High about Yoran's story of bicycling from Sweden to Nepal and towing his climbing gear behind him to climb solo. He was mentioned in the famous book Into Thin Air as helping bring people down who were in trouble above. He eventually accomplished that climb and then he bicycled back, but his trip from Sweden to Nepal was entirely under his own human power. And yeah, it was an inspiration for me. And he came to Seattle for a presentation in the summer of 2001. There, I got to meet him. I was part of the local American Alpine Club chapter. We were one of the organizers of that event. And I got to talk to him ahead of the presentation. And he asked me, when I told him about my plans to go around the world by human power, he asked me when I was going to start and if I had sponsors. So when we meet these kinds of folks, they tend to challenge us and they hold up a mirror and say, "Hey, are you the one?" And so I had to swallow hard and say, "Well, no," to both. And I didn't have a starting date. I did not have sponsors, and I was still researching and talking about it, and not moving. And when we next met, that was in Ouray, Colorado during their ice climbing festival the next winter. He was with his sponsor tent talking to folks, and I met him there, and he said, "You haven't just started yet." And I told him, "Well, September 11 happened. Is the world a safe place at all?" I had excuses to not start. And he told me that he was moving nearby to Issaquah near Seattle, where I lived. And we promised that we would go climbing together. And then he was gone again, disappeared. He turns out he climbed Everest one more time. And out of the blue, in September of 2002, I got this phone call saying, I'm back. Let's go climb. And on that first opportunity that we got to climb together, the accident happened. And yeah, we were airlifted. And then we had to go fetch his car and deal with the aftermath. It was quite the tragedy. And for someone who's accomplished big feats on K2 and Everest to lose his life on a short climb, short pitch, half a rope length climb like that was really tragic. And that was the turning point for me. I went to his funeral in Stockholm, and on the way back from the funeral, I drew the world map on a piece of paper, marked the highest summits on each continent, and except Antarctica, which I thought would not be possible to get to by human power, and decided I was going to aim to reach each one of these summits by human power in his memory.
Obviously, such a tragic story, but also such a pivotal moment for you. Now, your decision to do a human powered circumnavigation, you're the first person in history to have done it. I want to backtrack a little bit because to come up with the idea to do a solo circumnavigation by human power, you don't just wake up one day and just go, that's what I want to do. There's a lot of understanding yourself, understanding your skill set. The whole Venn diagram of your experiences have to come together. How did you formulate the idea that this is what I want to do?
Well, remember in 1997, I traced my finger on that map on the wall, and I did not start the circumnavigation until 2007. So it took 10 years for this thing to simmer and mature in my mind and to get started to commit. As I suggested, I had a lot of excuses. I met Nuran fell 2002. So 5 years later is when I actually started moving. I was fit. I had plenty of experience in the outdoors. So uh, experiences that I could transfer from all disciplines to what I wanted to do were there, and I had to patch the gaps. I had to gain experience on the oceans. I had no experience on open oceans, and I had to get a suitable vessel. So I had seen Jason Lewis do his thing. I had contacted him back in 2004 for the first time, and he was using a propeller driven boat. So should I use that same method? Then I discovered Ocean Rowing Society in London and started looking at the used boats that they had. They were regularly organizing races across the Atlantic from the Canary Islands to Barbados at the time. Nowadays, they're going to Antigua. So I obtained one of those vessels, and that same vessel that had crossed the Atlantic twice now became my vessel to spend another 1,084 days by the time I gave it up to a museum. That's three and
So
a half,
hang on.
5% of
Ha-
my life on that
Had,
boat.
had you done any rowing before you came up with this idea?
Well, since I knew that I was going to row, I started doing flat water rowing and rowing shells in a rowing club in Seattle, especially when I got to move to Seattle eventually from Washington, D.C. And I started getting introduced more to the concept of rowing and the technique and how to row without injuring myself and my back. And then getting ideas on how to train specifically for rowing. I knew training principles from all my athletic life prior, but of course, this required different kind of dedication. And since I was going to do a circumnavigation by human power, I could use different modes of travel. So I had the kayak. I needed to learn how to do Eskimo rolls, practice those. I had to make sure that I knew how to live on an ocean rowing vessel for so long that required time up alone on the oceans. I needed to know how to navigate and seek advice, how to communicate from the rowing boat, how to deal with emergencies. All of those things had to be skills to be gathered. Then I started reading books about these and also wanted to gain that information from the journals of others. So I try to absorb as much information as possible. However, you can spend another 10 years just reading and planning and dreaming and talking about it. So at some point, one has to take action, right? And for me, the ocean rowing and the commitment to the circumnavigation happened when I obtained a boat. So gaining experience itself is a challenge. So I decided that in order to gain the necessary experience before I commit to the circumnavigation, I should take the boat across the Atlantic. So in 2004, 2000, no, 2005, 2006 season, uh, the boat was on the in Portugal. Then with another rower, we reached Canary Islands, and I continued from Canary Islands, Las Palmas, to Guadeloupe on my own. It took me 96 days to get across. So that was a nice transition and an expedition to gain experience as
Was
an ocean.
those were those 96 days the first big long patch that you had to yourself?
Yes, it was. And it was a good test of my skills, my mental fortitude, my patience. And all of these had to be, it was a good shakedown, if you want to call it that. And I knew what I lacked. I knew how I could improve the boat. I knew what else I had to have on the boat that I didn't have. All these things then helped me prepare the boat better for the longer row that I took as part of the circumnavigation, which was the Pacific.
So, Erden, it's one thing to dream about something like this, but it's another thing to actually step off the shore. What was the day like when you first officially began your first big expedition?
When I wanted to leave from San Francisco, first departure from Tiburon out the Golden Gate Bridge was a failure. What happened is the onshore winds were just too strong, and I couldn't get the boat to move, even though I had the tide. The tide turned eventually, and I was locked in, and we had to tow the boat back. And I thought, wait a minute, I need to rethink this. I just couldn't get out of the Golden Gate. So eventually, I decided I needed to move the start away from San Francisco, just northwest to another port called Bodega Bay, which had a marina, so that I didn't have to deal with the tidal schedules because the winds kicked up, especially in the afternoon, and it calmed down overnight because the land was warmer and the ocean was cold. So there was this pattern constantly. So it made sense that I should leave in the dark hours of the morning when the wind was calmest so that I could put some distance between me and the land before I got sucked back in. When I realized that and started looking at the weather patterns, a low pressure system formed and just came up the coast, which is a counterclockwise spin of the winds. And that meant that the onshore wind pattern was broken. So I chose to leave from Bodega Bay, no tide restrictions, with an offshore wind, took me out and put me 70 miles away, straight out. And then when I got to 70 miles out, the wind reestablished from the northwest, and I dropped like a rock due south, and the coastline was receding away from me towards San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Diego. So it was a picture perfect departure. So first failure was followed by I got experience, I got this. Boom, I was gone.
So that first, I want to go back to that first failure. You're setting out on a journey that eventually takes you more than 5 years, yet you couldn't even get off land to begin with. How did that affect you mentally?
There was a lot of pressure. My sponsors were involved. They had come to send me off. Everything was recorded, and then here I am. I can't even get off the continent, and it was a disappointment, obviously. And then, of course, it's created a lot of complications. I mean, my wife was working, she had come to send me off. I had already departed and I wasn't paying enough attention. We learned to handle that better over the years. But so she left a bit disappointed after my departure. And then here I was stuck on land. She was working and I was still in the US and we weren't together all that time. And I was debating whether or not to go home or to try again, or it was a very fluid and frustrating period until I recommitted. So June 3rd was, if I remember correctly, my first attempt. And then the second actual departure happened on July 10th.
So
Quite a
you must
bit.
have had a lot of doubters, a lot of naysayers after that first failed attempt. People saying, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're doing, you failed once, it's not going to happen. How did you deal with those kinds of things? Because I'm sure that they came.
You see, 1997 onward, I had come across plenty of people who questioned my sanity. And when I tried to get information and get ideas, there were plenty who were dismissive and cynical or just not taking it seriously. And of course, I didn't know enough to design a proper route. And if I suggested, here's what I'd like to do, will this work? What do you think? I would get ridiculed. And often I was talking to sailors. A sailboat behaves differently than a rowboat. And when I got weather routing information, I was getting that from people who were sailors. And it just didn't quite apply. I didn't become part of that conversation. I couldn't direct that conversation until I gained the experience. So over time, I got better and I was really able to study the weather reports going back, climatological data going back decades, and then really distilling all that information and absorbing it. And then after digesting it all, trying to design a route that actually could work. And then I could go with a real plan to an expert. Eventually, during the pandemic, for example, I rode from Crescent City, California to all the way to Philippines by way of Waikiki and Guam. And that took 239 days total. And that was a perfectly executed crossing in partnership with my friend Jason Christensen, who's a weather router for yacht races and such. And we were really closely collaborating and making it happen. I was the engine, but of course, I had to find the feasible path across. You can't just draw a straight line and start rowing. It just doesn't work that way.
You've mentioned family and friends. When you first told them that you were going to do this circumnavigation, what was their first reaction?
When I told this to my father, he asked, "What about your career?" So, as an engineer with degrees and such, I had been working, but what happened in year 2000 was, of course, first uh, the dot bomb happened. Dot com industry crashed in Seattle. And so I was laid off. The company where I was working was taken over by another that wanted the Oracle side of our consulting business. And I was on the Microsoft side and I was laid off. So that didn't help. A lot of people were looking for work in Seattle and it was a frustrating period. And I had multiple interviews happening. So since it wasn't going to happen in Seattle, I was ready to go back to becoming a road warrior, a consultant that flies to places, does the job, comes back on weekends, that kind of thing. I was willing to do that. So I was talking to even international assignments, Deloitte and Touche and IBM Global Services. I was had multiple interviews talking to VP level folks, expecting an offer anytime. And then September 11 hit, hiring freezes came, everything was suspended. So it just wasn't working. And I said, I can't continue like this. So I'm going to get physical now. I mean, in the sense that I am going to be outdoors. I'm going to be a mountain guide and I'm going to pursue firefighting duties with the Seattle Fire Department. So I did the uh, written exam for Seattle Fire Department. I was waiting for the physical exams. I had completed the basic training as a mountain guide, and I took wilderness first responder course and getting to complete that process. Then when all that happened, as that was happening, Yoran's accident happened and I changed course. I just pulled the plug on everything and took off. I wasn't going to put off anything anymore.
So, what did your wife say when you wanted to do your circumnavigation?
Well, I met my wife on a consulting duty when I traveled to Chicago for a requirements gathering meeting, and she was on the customer side. And we met in the coffee room, and she asked me, "Oh, why haven't I met you before?" I said, "Well, I work in Seattle. I'm visiting. That's probably why." And she said, "What are you doing in Seattle?" I wasn't going to talk about work. I was just so tired of work related stuff. Got smart and I said, "Would you like to know what I'd rather do?" And that was my comeback. And she says, "What's that?" And I said, "I'd like to go around the world by human power." So that was my answer. That's how we got to introduce
So,
ourselves.
this was already part of the package that you sold to
Yeah,
her.
right there. That was my entry. And she said, "Okay." So she had to know more. We had lunch and the rest is history. And then eventually she moved to Seattle. Of course, she
Sounds
had,
like the greatest pickup line, by the way.
you know, it worked. Uh, I get lucky sometimes like that. And, after so many tries, she was the right one at the right time when I had the right phrase in place. So
That's fantastic.
I
So,
can't be more grateful.
now, this expedition took over 5 years. How did your wife deal with that separation for so long? Obviously, you saw her along the journey, but there's massive periods. For example, there's one stretch where you were rowing for 312 days by yourself, solo. How do you deal with it, but also your wife deal with that
Yeah.
separation from, for you, being separated from the rest of the planet and your wife being separated from you?
So I think it's a mindset as well. Going back to that initial introduction and how we transitioned into this lifestyle. After Yaron's accident, I sat across the table with Nancy after she came back from her trip, and I said, "I must do this now." She said, "You will, you must." And we didn't look back. We made choices. We rearranged our lives. We had a Lakeview condo, two income pair, a couple. We had a nice place in Seattle overlooking downtown. We sold that, moved a bit farther away, rearranged our finances so I could cash out my retirement funds and commit. All of those things were joint decisions. So we were on that path together. We started walking side by side. And when uh, we prepared in the beginning, I was more focused on everything and I could get sucked in so deep that she felt sidelined, ignored. And so she would voice those. And of course, I got better at managing that transition into the expedition mode. And while on expedition, as long as she heard from me, whether it was by short messages from my satellite phone or our weekly Sunday calls, as we had it to manage the expenditures, we limited our calls that way. As long as she heard from me, she was fine. Even when there was trouble, she knew that I had the frame of mind, I had the right mindset to be safe, that she could trust me out there and I'd make the right decision. And physically she trusted me, mentally as well. She knew that I could handle it. So when we separated, we weren't necessarily we met late in life. So when we met, I was 40. She's a couple of years older than me. So we were already standing on our own 2 feet. So we could function on our own, but we were better together, stronger together, obviously. So separation didn't hinder us. It actually allowed us to miss each other and come back together and have stories to share and have a joint accomplishment, if you will, because it became our journey, not me being gone doing my thing. And
Wow.
it just became this constantly evolving relationship, and I think it made us stronger in the end. There was no other way to survive this anyway.
Wow, that's beautiful. Now, I want to get into some of the more specifics and the hardships of the adventure because once you're out there, the safety net's gone. It's just you, the boat, the ocean. Can you describe? You might be 100 days, 150 days into an ocean row. What was your typical day at sea?
A typical day at sea would be I would, you know, I need to get 8 hours of sleep in total. And I would be waking up with daybreak. So as the darkness breaks and there's a hint of daylight and before the sun rises, I'm awake. I then would get out, do my, you know, morning business, use the bucket and all that kind of stuff. And then after a short period of adjustment, I would get outside and start rowing. Having my breakfast would be just as the sun is rising, as I'm getting going. I'm heading west, so sun would always be behind the boats in the mornings, and then the day would start. It would go on. I would nibble. I would, if I got bored, I would message to see like high school kids. We would be texting each other over the satellite phone, and typically I would hang up the oars with sunset. I wanted to always watch the horizon on the western horizon to see the green flash. That's a phenomenon that happens as the sun is just dropping behind the horizon, below the horizon. Um, it's a momentary flash of green right on the horizon. Of course, you cannot have a wave in between or a cloud in between to be able to observe that. So it took a lot of observations to see any. So every sunset, I would watch and try to see it. And then, so that was an excuse to tie up my oars and transition into, okay, I got to prepare my dinner, lay down, write down my messages, start journaling, blogging, whatever I had to do before it was time to sleep because it was a long day. And then, of course, the night would be in the cabin. The boat would continue on its journey across the ocean. The routes that I designed were such that the ocean would carry my boat in the general direction I wanted to go because I had the currents and the trade winds and the swells all taken into account to achieve that. So my daily plan, the rate that I would travel, was roughly 30 miles a day and 1,000 miles a month. That was the rough number. Of course, it would be more than that, less than that. And as long as, statistically speaking, the boat would continue in that direction, I would correct course during the day. It would be 10 miles overnight, 20 miles during the day, typically. That's how you can think about it. And the course correction that I would make would keep me on the route that I had designed in advance. So it was not an accident that I got across. I had to think hard about what path to follow so that statistically speaking, I would be on the right path. If things changed, you got a low pressure system come by, mess up the winds until it came back to normal. I could, if the ocean wasn't giving me what I wanted, I would try to slow that down by, say, deploying a para anchor and resting. You know, it's a lot of time for journaling. And if it was doing what I wanted, that was a good time to let the boat run. I could still rest, right? Of course, then in between, mostly out of boredom, I would have to get out and row. I'm trying to I'm making it sound easier than it was, but there was a lot of course correction going on. What I'm
Yeah,
trying to say is the ocean was my friend in most cases.
Ed, you paint a picture of tranquility, calmness, bliss, things that people all across the planet would want to chase. But you and I both know that that's not the case. Tell
It
me
is not.
about tell me about the night the rogue wave hit. What happened in those moments?
Well, there was one night when I was rowing across the Pacific, 2000, when I uh, received a wave. It was boxing seas outside. Those happen when swells from one direction mix typically with a perpendicular wave train that the winds brought. When that happens, then you get boxing seas. So the peaks add, valleys subtract, and then you get this up down motion rather than the regular pattern of a wave following the boat. And those can be dangerous. That's when rogue waves can happen. So, with that up down motion, one of those came and popped the boat from one side and knocked it on its side. And as I was laying, I typically sleep face down with a knee to one side and the opposing arm to the other side to minimize this rolling motion. That's until the arm falls asleep. That's how you sleep. I was thrown as the boat rolled. I was thrown off my mattress to the side and top of the cabin, and that hit my back, my rib against the structure of the cabin on the side, and I was sore a bit. But then the boat settled again. Of course, it happens. You take stock. Am I okay? Is the boat okay? Is everything together? And then go back to sleep. Of course, when I went back to sleep, I tied myself down so I wouldn't be tossed again. So going forward from then on, if the conditions justified it, I would always tie myself down. If something broke out there, I could replace it if I had a spare. I could repair it if I had the kit to repair it, or I could do without. Those were the options. And for the human body, it's not as easy. I need to be careful how I care for myself, avoid injury, infections, exposure, sunburn, chafing. All of those things had to be managed out there to keep myself functioning.
Now, you've had equipment failures, you've had rogue waves flipping you upside down. How do you manage fear during these moments?
Fear is temporary. It's an emotion. It is present. It keeps one alive, but one cannot give in to fear. So the fear manifests itself in these long duration events as worry and trepidation and uncertainty. All of those things combine to become this ever present driver of your actions. So it keeps one safe. You take precautions and you keep asking, evaluating, reconsidering, constantly evaluating risk and developing patterns and habits. And those patterns and habits keep one alive by managing the situation and the environment properly and taking the right precautions. One stays one step ahead of any problems. So the biggest thing is to face those things that create the fear, assess whether or not they're going to come to threaten me. Is the danger present? Yes. Is it going to hurt me or mess up my plans? How likely is that? So that's really risk assessment. If it's a whale knocking me over and crashing my boat, and how likely is it? It's unlikely. Therefore, I did not worry about it. So if you think about it as that, I cannot obsess about this and not continue. What about sharks? Everybody asks me, Well, they're in the water. I am in the boat. As long as I'm not swimming in the water, unlikely that one would bother me. In fact, they would come and scrub on the hull of the boat. And if I hear sandpaper sound, I know, yeah, it's a shark pacing with my boat, because all fish like to hang out under the shadow of a larger fish because they can then see sideways and not get glare. And I would have a whole ecosystem under the boat that way. Door knock sound would be a sea turtle feeding on the barnacles under the boat kind of thing, or chirping sound are the dolphins. So I would know what was going on around me. So the risk is, again, is there a danger? How likely is it? And then how do I mitigate that? Of course, mitigating dangers has to do with preparation. So risk is relative. So what would be a fearful and a very risky proposition for someone that could instill fear in them? So to such extent that they wouldn't undertake that event or action or motion, it may be very possible for me. For an expert rock climber, they just move up the rocks with great skill and grace, and it's a joy to watch them perform. For someone off the street who hasn't climbed at all, they wouldn't be able to get off the ground after 2 meters height below them. They would freeze and they wouldn't be able to move, and the fear would just grab them and they wouldn't be able to let go. So it is all relative, and I think preparation and having the right tools and the right skills are important. With that, the threat is mitigated. The danger is always there. Awareness increases. So what we don't want is to be in a situation where the danger is there, but we are not aware of it. And then we're surprised. So with advanced thought and preparation, one essentially develops a checklist in mind. So when faced with danger, something goes wrong, and immediately I am in problem solving mode. I can't be panicking and freezing and not acting because time may be very limited. Things may have to be fixed very quickly. I can handle that easier on my own because yelling orders in all directions to others to get them going is a very frustrating deal. That's why there are dry runs and exercises done military folks know this. So you can't be in the trenches and freezing when a team has to execute in unison in a coordinated fashion to be effective. So in a way, it's war against nature, if you want to put it that way. But I like to think of it as I am in sync. I take things as they come. It's predictable. I knew this could happen. I was ready for it. So let's go down the checklist and then fix things. The unpredictable ones could be other vessels charging down on me.
It's interesting. And one of my past guests, a lady called Lisa Blair, who's a solo sailor, holds the world record for the fastest solo circumnavigation of Antarctica. In 2017, her boat was dismasted, and in the middle of the night, 8-meter waves, 40-knot winds. The worst situation you would want to be in because you're 1,000 nautical miles from the closest piece of land. She was having to make life or death decisions there on the spot. If I go and do that, there's a 50% chance that I'm going to die. But if I stay here, there's a good chance I'm going to die in the next 24 hours. But what it came down to is exactly what you're talking about, that preparation. I like to say prior preparation prevents piss poor performance. She had gone over with experts and other yachties and her on land team of all the different types of dismasting scenarios. And we can't control the environment that we're in. And there's no point having fear of that external stuff that we don't have control over. We have to appreciate that those dangers are there. And if something catastrophic does happen, having the bravery and having the self-fortitude to know that our training and our preparation kicks in and we know how to handle that.
Correct. So typically this comes up as an expression where we control the controllables. So things that are not in our control can happen, may happen. If they happen, then what can I control in that chaos to rein in the damage, to survive, to keep my kit together, to keep myself together, and to get through. I am preparing right now, for example, for the Golden Globe race, which are going to happen in dated vessels. Mine was built in 1976, a full keel vessel, up for the task. All vessels have to be built before 1988. One of the requirements that we have for this race is to have 2 identical spinnaker poles and a kit ready to set up an A-frame in case we get dismasted, to set up a jury rig. So we would use our storm sail and whatever sails we have left on board, and then we can then hobble along toward a port to get away from danger, to make some advance so we don't have to involve others immediately to come to our rescue. So that kind of advanced preparation and test and demonstrating the skills and documenting that is one of the requirements. And this kind of thing has to happen if we are going to take on these massive expeditions where others may have to come to our rescue. And self-reliance and self uh, uh, protection is paramount. It's a it's what a responsible adventurer must do, and to minimize cost in time and money to others. So it is part of an honor system where I do my part to the extent that I can manage, and then do not create these uh, emergencies for others. They do not need to get involved until it's absolutely necessary.
Now, Eden, what was the longest period you've gone without seeing another human being?
That's hard to tell because the longest time that I was at sea with my rowboat nonstop was 312 days, but I did see other vessels. They did come by and check me out. My boat was bright yellow, very visible. An odd thing, they're not used to seeing those. They would always think it was a little, one of those life vessels, rescue vessels from a sunken ship. And people would come by and call me up, lean over the edge and yell at me, and I would come up
He's
with
just
a
some
walking
random
talk.
guy in the middle of the ocean rowing.
They would start leaning over the edge and start yelling, and then I would come up with my radio in hand and start talking, and they would say, "Where's your ship? How many are you?" Oh, the typical question. I say, "This is my ship. I'm one." Was my answer. So that happened more than once.
So
It's
there
quite
must have been a lot of moments of just absolute pure boredom. These little moments must have really broken you out of that. How do you push through the boredom?
well. Boredom is definitely one of the biggest challenges out there because it's always essentially the same view with variations to the theme. As creatures come and go, that would become an interesting distraction. Immediately, one can start entertaining oneself by paying specific attention to that. And then, as boredom sets, the mind has a way of running wild. A lot of thoughts keep spinning in there. They become these obsessive, repetitive thoughts. And planning the future, dealing with the past. I should have punched them, whatever kind of stuff comes and goes. You just play these past events and they can become very tiring. So one has to change the subject, is what I thought I should do. And that's what I was doing. The monkey mind is going to take over, right? People have meditation sessions. I don't call it meditation necessarily, but it is really that. It's one of reeling it back in and focusing on my breathing, for example. So it's not quiet. I can't hear my heartbeat necessarily. Listening to my breathing while I'm rowing and timing it with the waves is difficult. So what would I do? I could listen to the wind. I could pick up a wave, five back, and follow that arriving at my boat. I could hear the birds in the distance. I could try to pick out that one individual out of them and see if I could listen to that particularly, or that one cloud out there. That one, what does it look like? Oh, it looks like, I try to fit an image. Is it an elephant? Is it a person? That kind of thing. Just find a task. Failing all that, start doing the multiplication table. Start 1 times 1 equals 1, 1 times 2 equals 2. Just give a task to that mind that is running uncontrolled and busy with that one thing. Do not plan the future. Do not deal with the past. Be here. This is your task. See how far you get. I never got past 4 times 1. So by the time you get there, it's sort of, okay, at least temporarily, that whatever thought I had is suppressed. So boredom has its ways. And then one way that I dealt with boredom was having a pattern, having a schedule. So once I left from shore, for example, they say it takes 21 days to gain new habits. That is true at sea as well. So it took a while, at least 2 weeks, for me to break from the pattern on shore, and missing the pattern, missing the routine, the ability to pick up your phone and talk and the distractions, the hustle and bustle, the TV blaring and the radio playing, and then, you know, anytime you want your computer, you have access to everything, kind of thing. All those, failing that, just go out for a jog or walk or go to a movie. None of that exists anymore. So you all of a sudden, boom, you pull the plug and off you go into a new existence, and that takes time to adjust. And then after 3 weeks, the physically as well, I am adjusting. So I can work out all I want on shore before departure on an ocean crossing, but I will never be ready to row as long as I need to, because I'm never rowing for 8 hours on shore. I am maybe working out an hour and then I call it done. So I'm fit, but not totally adjusted. So it takes time for the body to adjust as well. So with the 3 to 6 weeks out, I am totally adjusted physically and mentally as well. I have now gained the habits. Waking up in the morning is not a chore, cleaning up, eating, existing, surviving, moving the boat, just doing the daily. You wake up in the morning, you have to clean the deck of all the flying fish. For example, that's part of the routine. And all these things happen very naturally. And that routine then becomes the new existence. So there is no boredom in that. One just does and exists and moves, and there are no distractions, and you're in the moment and you're moving along with the events. And in doing so, one demonstrates mastery, and being in that setting then is satisfying and one is happy. And it's a whole different mindset. So I would like to say, yeah, I get bored, but I get over it very quickly, is really what I'm getting at. And that pattern helps.
It's interesting, Eden. I've often said that routine sets us free. When we have a set routine, we go through the motions, it takes us into, like you say, that Zen state, regardless of what it is. But routine
Being in
means
the
we've
being in the flow, maybe you make
been in
say.
the flow. Yeah, exactly. Now, adventures like this, they always have their dark moments as well. It's not just boredom, it's not just looking at the sunset. There's obviously times where you're really testing your absolute limit. What was the lowest moment on this circumnavigation?
Well, there were more than one. For example, on the 2007-2008 season Pacific Crossing, my destination, having left from Bodega Bay on California shores, was Australia. I specifically wanted to get to Mooloolaba.
That's where I am.
Yeah, you are?
I
Awesome.
am.
Yeah. So that was the goal, but it was a strong La Nina year, which changed the wind patterns, and the equatorial winds were stronger than normal. So once I came southwest with the trade winds into the area where you would meet the counter current, it just became impossible to head west. Each time I tried to get across, I would get blown with the southeast winds back north. There was an episode where for about 13 days I was doing circles. And eventually I worked my way out of that back north and continued west. I couldn't cross the equator to gain the south equatorial current, which would have taken me to Australia. I ended up north of Papua New Guinea. My batteries were not charging anymore and I was always soaked. There was no way to avoid the rain for days, which reached into months. I was in this miserable state, trapped. I couldn't get out of it. So I was continuing west, west, ever west, and not getting south of the equator and not getting information about where I could cross, when I could cross. I didn't have enough communication capabilities and hadn't the weather support back then as I had hoped. I ended up north of Papua New Guinea, and it was a very long, trapped state of mind that was frustrating. 312 days was not accidental. I ended up out of control north of Papua New Guinea when we had to ask for help from the Philippine fishermen who were catching tuna in the Papua New Guinea waters. So I finally made it toward Papua New Guinea, and just one last bit of weather, a low pressure system came and pushed me back toward equator. And at that point, 312 days, I had 1 week worth of food left, and it was the typhoon season. I was in the wrong hemisphere in the wrong season. I hadn't crossed the equator to be safe. And so we said, okay, it's time to pull the plug on this. That was a very long, uh, drawn out frustration, ending up with a disappointment. But with that, I made new friends in the Philippines. The fishing fleet just picked me up. They took me all the way to General Santos City on Mindanao Island. I became part of their crew. I observed their catching tuna and all the processes. We stopped at Papua New Guinea before sailing over to General Santos City, and they were the friendliest folks. The people just very warm and dear. So the Philippines has become a second home to me as a reason.
Through all of this, was there a moment where you just felt like abandoning this whole idea of circumnavigating the planet?
My crossing of Africa was difficult. I was alone on a bicycle and we were very low on funding. We had reached our limits and I wasn't getting the support that I needed, and having to spend money all the time was frustrating. I didn't think that I could make it, but then I had to keep my head down and continue. And when I called about the traffic, life being cheap, traffic being chaotic, buses passing by very fast, and roads not being good or anything of the sort. I mean, I could complain about anything and everything. I was in that state of mind. When I called my wife, she would ask me, "Where's the joy?" So I couldn't call her either because I needed the vent and I couldn't. And so it became a very difficult time, primarily because of all the financial pressures and also not getting the recognition. I had set up a nonprofit in Seattle to educate and inspire children, especially, and we were doing educational projects beyond the expedition costs themselves. I needed to be connected. I had to use a satellite phone. I was spending money to do that. And I was raising funds to do educational projects, but then I wasn't getting the coverage. A nonprofit exists by public contribution. And if I am not known, if I don't have the coverage, if I had media coverage, I could then uh, be get into the living rooms or the boardrooms and the classrooms, right? If I got into the living rooms, I could get donation. If I got into boardrooms, I could get sponsorships. If I got into classrooms, I would accomplish my mission. And I wasn't getting that because I didn't have the coverage. And not getting that was frustrating me because I was failing in my mission. So I had stacked too much on top of my journey with expectations of success, if you will, and I was failing. And that was weighing down on me. That became a big burden, a big albatross. And the down period, the dark period was Africa all the
So
way.
then, how do you pull yourself out of that?
Now I just keep carrying on,
Just
one
keep
day after
carrying on.
another. Just
So,
carry on.
more than 5 years after you set off from San Francisco, the end is in sight. Tell me about that moment when you crossed the finish line. How did that happen? And how did that make you feel?
I had a month of bicycling to be done across to my starting point, Bodega Bay. And as soon as we reached the finish line, the gate to the marina was closed. So I climbed over the fence and the gate, and jumped on the other side, and went to the same pontoon where I had departed, dipped my toe in the water, and I said, "Yep, loop is closed."
At that finish line, was there
Yeah,
anybody there?
yeah, my dear friend Norman Watts. It was a small group, but a very meaningful group. Explorers Club members from San Francisco area came, so it felt good to get that crowd in there to meet me.
So, this 5 year journey, was it for personal satisfaction and accomplishment, or is it for attention or something else?
Well, the question that started as what if took a life of its own, and then once I committed to that journey, I kept going, and then once I started, I had to finish it because If I stopped, it would be failure. And then I stacked so much on top of this. I was saying with this nonprofit, its mission and wanting to accomplish additional things, fundraising and others, it became a huge snowballing set of activities that in a way got out of control. I think it got to be too big. And then, yeah, Nancy was right to ask, where's the joy? But in the end, when I did finish, I had to go to Guinness World Records and register all these records, document them, and make sure that they were recorded because, as I was saying, I wasn't getting the coverage I wanted. So nothing was getting documented. And I was resentful in many ways. And I said, if anything, we're going to register these records so that it is there. So someone later cannot claim these. It's already been done. So they're going to have to recognize me one way or another. That was my obsession. And that's how I got that done. And then being gone so long, I think I had duties as well. I was a son, I was a husband, and when Nancy, for example, left the day after I arrived to be with her mother, and I spent another day and started questioning, what am I doing here? I need to be with Nancy. I then joined her. And 2 days later, I was with them. And then within 24 hours of my arriving, mother was taken to a hospital and then she didn't survive the following morning. I was there right at the time that I was supposed to be, but I had to get back to becoming the son that I was, becoming the husband that I was, and let go of that expeditioner, the gritty, never quitting adventurer that I was, to becoming that softer side of me, the one that's caring, that is responsible, and that has duties and has a role in the society to play. It's a huge transition from one mindset to the next, but it has to happen. And that is forced on us every now and then, like in mother's situation where she was withering and I had to be there.
It's interesting, Erden. I speak to so many adventurers and they go off, do their adventures, and they expect to come home to acclaim. They come home to the family, and so the family goes, are you done now? All right. Now, can you take the rubbish out, do the dishes? It's your turn to wash the cars. We often drag our families into our adventures so much, but then forgetting that everybody has their life to lead. The world continues on regardless of what you're doing. And just as long as you're doing adventures for yourself to fulfill your life, to build your life into something that at the end of it, you're going to be proud of what you've achieved. Surely that is what the aim is.
Certainly. I mean, this circumnavigation was such a big idea, such a big project. I didn't know if I could finish it at the start, but in order to finish it, I had to become the person who could row the three oceans first ever, complete a circumnavigation by human power, first solo, first ever, set 15 separate Guinness World Records. I had to become that person. So it was a process of growth. And when I came back, I wanted to document this and talk about it, and I couldn't get it in front of speaking audiences, getting speaking engagements or a book project or whatever. None of that was happening, and that frustration was real. And I had lived with that for 5 years. When I came back, it really came heavy on my shoulders, and I felt like, okay, I can go back. And we had proven with Nancy that as long as I spent our money, I could keep breaking records. So I said, I need to go out there and demonstrate mastery. I need to get back out there, but I couldn't because we had spent all our resources. So I was stuck. And that was a very frustrating and depressing, dark period of my life. And yeah, I was suicidal. And it got to be difficult where I lived with this thing for a good year, year and a half, and then eventually worked myself out of it. I started sailing and I started working out more and got physical again. and found myself again in the physical sense. And that was an important lesson to not let those pressures get at me. So I do talk about this every now and then. So mental health is part of my causes, if you want to call it that. It's not that I am invincible, but if I let it, things can get at me and affect me negatively, and I need to be able to manage that. That is also a challenge. The prophet that comes back to the village and is not recognized, right? At the end of the journey, that also happens. So it's part of it.
Many people around the planet look at what you've done as superhuman. But when you bring it back, when you strip all that away, you get back into society, you have many of the struggles that everybody else has.
Yes.
So, day to day now, how do you deal? And you mentioned that getting out, keeping fit, keeping active, being part of a community, sharing your message. After everything that you've done, do you understand what your why is, what you stand for, and is that what gets you through day to day?
That's a loaded question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I uh, I think what keeps me going is to have larger than life goals. Without them, I get lost and I get distracted, and motivating myself is difficult. I am in retirement mode now, and I have been pretty much since I started this big long journey. And without these journeys becoming my compass or my rudder, however you want to look at it, and it's channeling my resources, be it time, money, and others, and relationships, what do I accomplish? Right. So then having these big projects organizes my life. Having hobbies organize my life. Then sailing has become an ongoing activity for me, where I've gained skills and I've gained certifications and I've gained licenses and became a sailing instructor. And so these activities start defining who I am and what I do. Each time I feel that I am lost, I can turn back and say, today I haven't worked out. Go work out. I have a dog. Walk the dog. I have responsibilities. Talk to my wife. Let's do something together. Let's have a memorable day today. What can I do to make a difference? These kinds of thoughts, these kinds of patterns start manifesting themselves over time to make me a better person, I think. Without a job, that 8 to 5 activity that defines me, I then have to manifest myself and demonstrate myself and my presence in different ways. So showing up is a big deal. Showing up to work out, showing up as a husband, showing up as a member of the community, mowing the grass on the street with the neighbors, just that's my turn now. Let's get it done. Those kinds of things. Just be and be present and be active is really what defines my days nowadays.
Erden, obviously the show's called Why Do You Think You Could Do That? And it's my turn to ask you this very question of everything that you have done. Why do you think you could do that?
I I was raised in a family that put guardrails but never roadblocks. And I was free to run as fast as I could down that road. That set me free. I was safe to play. So I think that became part of my character, that if I could define a path and I understood the limitations, and I can then excel in that one direction that was open ahead of me, then I could just go as far as I could, as long as I didn't come up with self-limiting thoughts. So I learned quickly early on, with sports as well, that the effort I put in was proportional to the results that I gained. And in between was my effort. And if I invested the time and effort to prepare myself properly, I was able to stand out in the crowd, to become that accomplished athlete or that accomplished student, and I could pursue these things. Yeah, it takes a lot of reminding to myself, often in this day and age of social media and a lot of distractions, to be focused and to be consistent and to be able to show up every day to build the muscle memory, if you will, to get these things done and to become an expert in what I do to develop mastery. So, why did I think that I could do it? I was the one to ask what if, and then I could weigh it against my skills and my preparation, and I could then keep researching. And if I, as I understood it better, I say, yeah, this is actually possible. And then if I didn't listen to others to put negative thoughts into my head, if I didn't get my thoughts to block me, if I kept an open mind, I could actually find the path forward. And as I was questioned by others, if they questioned my sanity and if they said, have you done anything like that before? I learned to ignore these people. I was asked initially, have you done anything like that before for the circumnavigation? Yeah. Well, it hasn't been done before, right? It's going to be a historic first, it turned out. And when I was getting ready to bicycle from Seattle to Mount McKinley, for example, as part of my Six Summits project in 2003, right after Yaron's accident, people were asking me, have you bicycled that far before? I said, no, but I knew that if I bicycled 50 miles a day and started February 1st, I could get there by mid-April, and I got to Anchorage April 11th. Even in winter conditions with studded tires and such, towing my climbing gear like Yaron had, I knew what was possible. I knew what I was capable of. And because others hadn't done such a thing, they were judging me with their own experience. So I learned quickly that others listen with their own mind. What they see is shaped and colored by their own experience. So if they look at what I am proposing, and if in their minds they can't do it, then I shouldn't be able to do it either, is a very natural defense mechanism. They don't know any better. I've learned that. And I've also learned that everybody has an opinion. They're entitled. Yeah. So yeah, that's manageable, and I was able to move past all of those. So
I think,
that's
Erden, you are the man in the arena. And so many people who are discrediting what you're doing or putting doubt in your mind have never stepped into the arena. And that gives you the permission to disregard everything that they say.
well, it over time, with more experience and more skill gained and more things accomplished. Yes, I have come to the point where I can make decisions. Not everybody needs to know, and I just carry on with my plans as long as I can afford it. I carry on.
Now, Erden, I love to finish off all of our conversations with the Brave Five. It's a rapid fire close. It's 5 questions. May seem quite random at times. Don't expect one question to lead into the other. Are you ready?
Boy, okay, here we go.
All right. Tell me, what's your first adventure you ever remember doing as a kid?
Oh boy, that's so far back. I am old now. Well, I was in boarding school, and there was this TV antenna that was under construction on the hills way over across the valley. And I had this idea that I could go climb it. Of course, I had no sense of distances, and I tried twice and failed.
Fair enough. Now, what's one comfort from home you secretly missed the most whilst you're out on the ocean?
A bed that doesn't roll and uh, freshwater showers.
And not having to
Very
be
basic.
tied, not having to be, huh?
Yeah, very basic. And of course, company of family and Nancy.
If you could take one song with you for the next expedition, what would it be?
Sea chanties, I guess.
Sea shanties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I can sing along, but I can't sing.
You're an ocean goer
I'm
from
not
way
bad.
back, huh?
Yeah.
Now, what's the bravest thing you've done outside of your expeditions?
Boy, it happened kind of naturally, but ask Nancy out.
I love it.
I asked her to move to Seattle from Chicago. She actually said yes. So,
Fantastic.
Yeah, that was the greatest thing.
Now, if you could give your younger self one sentence of advice, what would it be?
Never doubt your dreams.
Perfect.
Make them, dreams don't come alive, become real unless one owns them. So we have to think of dreams as this seed that we put into fertile ground. As they take root and sprout, there will be those who are going to want to trample it and then stomp it down. So we have to protect it, put a little fence around it, and then let it grow, get stronger so it can never be broken, have a strong body and grow taller. Yeah. So that seedling is inside us, in all of us. So where is it? Does it need water? How do you feed it? How do you make it grow? How do you protect it? Because, yeah, it needs to be held close until it has that strength to stand tall on its own.
That's a great analogy to end with. Erden, thank you so much for taking us on that journey, for proving that you don't have to be fearless, you just need to be willing. What you've done, it's not a story about superhuman strength. It's about an ordinary person who made an extraordinary choice to keep moving forward, stroke after stroke, no matter how big the ocean or how loud the storm. And here's the thing. The choice is open to all of us. You don't need a rowing boat, a compass, or 5 years to change your life. You just need to say yes to that thing that's been whispering in the back of your mind and take the first step. Now, Erden, how can people connect with you and follow your adventures?
I have a website. On the social, you can find me as well. ERDENERUC.com. First name, last name.com. And on there are relevant information, and there's going to be a tracking page as well. In the upcoming Golden Globe race, there's goldengloberace.com, an actual website where they will have regular YouTube and other social media sharings there as well for the whole fleet, all 30 of us that'll be racing. And yeah, you can follow the whole activity there as well. So there's just going to be a lot of action coming up within 12 months onwards for about 8 months at sea nonstop around the world. So yeah, follow along, please.
Fantastic. Erden Eruc, thank you so much. And I'll put all of those links into the show notes. And if this conversation sparks something in you, even the tiniest little flicker, protect it, feed it, and see where it leads. Because one day someone might look at you and ask, why do you think you could do that? And you'll have an answer that changes everything. I'm Sam Penny. This is Why Do You Think You Could Do That? And until next time, keep saying yes to the impossible.